I want to touch on a couple things real quick. I haven't heard Narissa's presentation before, but I have my second book coming out called The Science to Success, and it parlays real well into some things that she said. The first thing I want to touch on, she talked about eating habits, and the habit that she said, I read this study too not long ago, where our children aren't living as long as we are. That is frightening. That should scare a lot of people, and I think it should make people make different decisions than they are. But I want to touch on habits real quick because that's something I've spent a lot of time studying. And does anyone know where our bad habits come from? This is kind of rhetorical. I'm going to answer it because I'm going to go quick through some stuff. Our bad habits come from exceptions. I've done a tremendous amount of study on habits. This is something maybe for your notes. The most dangerous things we have to deal with in life are exceptions, bar none. Because you start making an exception once in life, it doesn't matter what area it is. I don't care if it's eating. I don't care if it's being dishonest. I don't care if it doesn't matter. An exception is what gets people off track in life. It derails you. You make an exception once, it makes it that much easier to make another exception, and then another exception, and then behavior that was completely abnormal to you begins to seem normal. I could give a whole talk on exceptions. That's important. Next, she talked about time. We all have the same amount of time. I work with people all the time who tell me if I had more time, I could make some more money. I tell them, forget it. You're not going to get any more time. We all have the exact same amount of time, and that's where it comes down to planning. I had my first CD come out recently. I talk a whole lot on this CD about planning. Someone said a long time ago, not having a plan is a plan to fail. And that's absolutely true. When it comes to the obesity, the exceptionally overweight person that was on the slide, I think that the overweight problems, John Maxwell is the one who said, our success, and I'm going to add failure, our success or failure is found in our daily agenda. Nobody's going to become overweight or obese by eating one chip or one fajita or one enchilada. We're going to become overweight by consistently doing it. The small things in life are probably the most important things to pay attention to. My last point of what Narissa worked with. She talked about the people you hang out with, their eating habits. One of the most important things I learned when I was devouring studies for my book was something called emotional contagion. What emotional contagion is in lay terms, it's monkey see, monkey do. If you see someone else do something, you mimic them. There's some glands inside, or neurons in our brain that just registers what other people do. And yawning is usually the best example I can use, but believe it or not, it happens when you're sitting at your table. When you see someone else pick up their glass and take a drink, what do? Intuitively, you'll do the same thing. When you go for a walk with somebody, you'll adjust to their pace. So those are the couple points I wanted to mention with Narissa's. I think that Zig Ziglar was the one who said, when he was writing his book, See You at the Top, he said that when he went to a physician to try to figure out how to get his weight right, because he couldn't tell people in his book, you can be what you want to be, you can do what you want to do, when he had a 42-inch waistline. And so he wanted to make sure that he was living his advice, living what he was saying. And he said, if you ever go to a physician or you go someplace and they give you a prescription to get your weight on track, he says, don't walk out of that physician's office. Run. Because you didn't gain the weight taking medicine, and you're not going to lose it taking it either. So let me go on to what I want to talk about, because Narissa said I have to give the immense Cliff Note version of this. The first thing I want to say is thank you guys very much for coming out. I know a lot of you are supporting each one of us, and that's very important. My goal for tonight, and you'll hear me talk a lot about goals, my goal for tonight is to inspire every single one of you to pursue your dreams, no matter what obstacles get thrown your way, because you're going to face a lot of obstacles when you're pursuing your dreams. And the second thing is, I want to give you a formula to achieve those dreams. a formula that's worked for me. I want to share a quote real quick with you I read in a book that I was reading recently that I thought was very profound. And that quote was this. It says, "People will cling to an unsatisfactory way of life rather than change in order to get something better for fear of getting something worse." Narissa, what's your quote about change?
Because you won't see changes unless you make changes.
That's right. People will cling to an unsatisfactory way of life rather than change in order to get something better for fear of getting something worse. What I already know about y'all is y'all don't cling to unsatisfactory ways of life. Because the people who do, they don't come to events trying to improve their health. They don't come to events trying to achieve their goals. Instead, they stay home and hope things get better. They stay home and hope things change. But something everyone needs to learn is hope is not a strategy. It might be part of it, but that's not the strategy. These are the same people who I say act as their own judge and jury and sentence themselves to life of mediocrity because they don't see any reason to put forth the effort and energy to improve. I joke around and say if we were to ask these people why the Stone Age ended, they'd tell us because we ran out of stones. That's not the case. The Stone Age ended because people kept growing and learning and improving. And you see, the desire to improve is in the DNA of all successful people. It always has been. And what I want to commend you guys for is having that desire to improve, having that desire to get better, having faith in your future. Boy, is that important. Having faith in your future and making that future brighter. I'm going to go through real quick now what I call the Cliff Notes version of my story. My first book comes out in March, Live and Learn 7 Life Lessons, and you can get the full-fledged thing there. But the Cliff Notes version, I call it the Rise, the Fall, the Recovery. And the rise starts the first time I fail. And the first thing I ever failed in life, believe it or not, was kindergarten. And not growing up in a very loving family, my mother pointed out that I must be the stupidest boy in the world to fail kindergarten. And you know what? I believed her. But what I lacked in education, I made up in motivation and determination. Still do. But I also figured out where my leadership skills came from as I was a great ball player. I said when I was younger I was part Labrador because I could play anything that had a ball in it, and I worked really hard to play. I remember my coaches sometimes when I was in the dugout, they'd look over at me and say, "McGilvrey, you're up." And I'd look at my coach, there's that dumb McGilvrey kid that failed kindergarten and spends a lot of time in summer school and after-school programs. And I'd say, "Coach, it's not my turn to bat yet." But they needed a hit. They needed to win this game, so they would fudge the order and get me in there. I'd get up to home plate, and before the pitcher ever released the ball, I knew where it was going. God gave me one of the greatest gifts as a little boy, and I think it was because my reality was too terrible to think about, the ability to see things better than they are. And so I would get up to that plate, and before the pitcher let go of the ball, I knew it was going over left field. And it might not have happened every time, but it happened a lot. It happened a whole lot. The state of Iowa didn't think it was a good idea I stay there any longer. She was making a lot of bad decisions, put me on a plane, sent me to Texas. So I said, I'm going to go fast. Put me on a plane, sent me to Texas, got to play ball at some great 5A schools, graduated high school, went to college, dropped out after a year. One of the dumbest things I ever did. I just couldn't get the education thing down. I didn't understand why I was learning all this information. Days and days still go by where I don't use the Pythagorean theorem. I don't know why they're teaching me this stuff. But anyhow, I wasn't mature enough to realize the value of education. I realize the value now. And all of our famous last words, if I knew now what I knew then, I certainly would have spent a lot more time in school. Dropped out of college, next day joined the Army. Next day left for basic training. Went to El Paso, worked with Air Defense, loved it, met a beautiful, classy, smart lady that I thought was great. There's a problem in the military, though. And they call it fraternization. She was my commanding officer. So very quickly, the colonel calls us into his office. We're standing outside of his office waiting for him to call us in, and she asked me, "What are you going to tell him?" And I tell her, "Well, I guess I'm going to say you can't control who you fall in love with." I'm 20 years old. I don't know. So anyhow, we walk into the colonel's office, march in, lock up to attention, salute, sit down. Colonel asks, "What's going on?" And she steals my line. Can't figure out, or you can't control who you fall in love with. Colonel gives us option A and option B. Option A is get dishonorably discharged. Neither one of us liked that option. Option B was get married that week. One of us didn't like that option. I won't tell you which one that was. Our lunch break, I don't know if it was the next day or the following day, our lunch break, we went and got married. A couple days later, maybe it was a couple weeks later, she was talking to her father on the telephone, and now my Army-issued father-in-law is talking to me, asking me what I'm going to do with my life, what I'm going to do with my career. He was a financial advisor with Edward Jones. Great investment company, recommended that I go to work for Edward Jones. I put together a resume, makes me look way better than I am, fill out the information for Edward Jones, and lo and behold, they hire me after a couple different interviews. I did good on the interviews, but I was astounded that I went from this kid to a financial advisor. Big problem though. 4 binders about that big, 8 inches thick, show up. And the first thing I read is I have to pass an exam that's 6 hours long. 6-hour exam was daunting to say the least. I start studying. There's about 50 of us that, throughout the United States, that got hired by Jones at the same time. I'm not getting this stuff. A laptop came with this information. We're taking our tests. They're shooting off the scores to St. Louis, Missouri. And when we're doing these conference calls with these other 50 people, they're all giddy and glee about their great test scores. I'm not doing better than a 30 on anything. I mean, the Stagel Act of 1933, the Investment Securities Act of 1934, calculating future values of money, dividend yield curves, memorizing the Chicago Board of Exchange's volumes. This stuff was hard. And because of my mindset that I wasn't smart, I was that dumb kid, I didn't get it. So I get a call from my trainer telling me that Jones decides to part ways with me. They don't want me to bring the industry average scores down. I was devastated because this was my shot to do something in life. What is the Marshall Bruce Mathers or Eminem? Look, if you have one shot or one opportunity to seize everything you ever wanted, would you capture it or just let it slip away? This was my shot to do something in life. So my sales skills go into overdrive. And I sell her on let me take the test. Give me a chance. I'll study harder. The only thing I could do to study harder was sleep in my books because I was studying as hard as I could and osmosis was not working. Test day comes. I go down to the Sullivan Learning Center there in El Paso, Texas, hand my ID, and go to my testing booth. Immediately get thrown a curveball. The curveball is this. On those tests that I was taking with Edward Jones, they had A, B, C, and D. On this exam, this 6-hour exam now, they have A, B, C, D, and E, none of the above. So that really hurts me in my process of elimination area. I'm going through this test hours and hours and hours, marking several of the boxes for review, and 4 or 5 hours into this exam, it tells me I'm done. Do I want to go back and review the questions that I just looked at? And I say yes, I'm changing A to D, I'm second guessing myself for everything, C to B, and finally I just come to the realization, I've got to submit this test and see what happens, see how I did. I whisper a short will, if this is in your will, God, let it happen. And I press the button and another screen comes up and says, are you sure this is what you want to do? I wasn't sure, but I had to press the button. Hourglass comes on, it's going over, around and around. Minutes go by, seems like eternity. My fate is right there waiting. But the most beautiful word comes on that screen, pass. And here's what I learned. That very moment, a switch transferred my brain. And that switch said, those people lied to you. You're not stupid. You're a lot smarter than everyone thought you were. Because this is not an easy exam. And I achieved it, and my new confidence going forward, I call my trainer when I walk out of there, tell her that I passed the exam. The only person more surprised that I passed it was her. Because she wanted me to fax my test results to her. She said that was customary, but I learned later that it wasn't. She told me the next day I have my next exam, which is the state laws, Series 63. With my new confidence, I go in and take this test and nail it. Not a big deal at all. Get on an airplane, fly to St. Louis. Financial advisor and I start training. Open an office in New Braunfels, Texas. And the one thing I did, I was so proud of this job. I was so thankful to be there. I was so young in this business. I did the work. And Jones said, if you will walk up and down the streets and knock on people's doors and introduce yourself, and you'll get 25 people's names, you'll be a millionaire. That's all you need to tell me. I'm not going to ask questions. I don't always understand why things happen. I just do what I'm told. And I did that then. And I worked really hard, but my bogey was never 25. My bogey was 50. And that comes back from being younger, having that motivation and determination. But it comes with the will to succeed. It comes with the will to prove yourself. A lot of people do things sometimes to prove themselves, and they want to say that's not bad. Push yourself. See how far that you can go in life. Get those faulty belief systems out of your mind. I'd love to give just a talk on just that. So anyhow, I'm walking up and down these streets in a cheap Goodwill suit, sweating my tail off because obviously it's hot here in this area. And if I see someone that has younger children around, I'm talking to them about college savings plans. If I see someone that's older, I'm talking to them about tax savings plans. Slowly but surely, I start becoming successful. I have some great mentors because I sit at their feet and I ask them, how did you get so great? Some of them weren't great, but I wanted to learn. I wanted to do whatever it took to be successful. I wanted to do whatever it took to break generational welfare that had plagued my family for a very long time and become successful and do something with my life and be an asset to society, not a liability. And there's a lot of motivation that comes when you do something like that. I set the very first goal I set the right way. It's the same formula I'm going to give you as soon as I run through this real quick. I set my first goal with Edward Jones to win this very prestigious trip that was only reserved for their elite financial advisors. Told everybody I was going to win this trip because I just read Zig Ziglar's book, See You at the Top. He made me feel like I could do anything in the world if I put my mind to it. If I followed his goal-setting strategy. Boy, do I wish I would have come up on this information when I was younger. So I followed the strategy that he gave me. I had the confidence because I figured out I wasn't dumb. I figured out that I started achieving a little bit of success. And lo and behold, I win this trip. Everybody is baffled of how I won this trip, but I won through working my butt off, holding events. I remember I had some events in New Braunfels. I'd invite hundreds and hundreds of people, and 5 would show up. I'd still give them part of the things that I wanted to talk about. I had this famous crystal ball seminar back then, where I would tell everybody I could see the future, and then I would talk to them about all the bad things that had happened, and then I'd actually told them, you know what? We're always going to go through litanies of disaster in life. There's always going to be problems with finance, and I won't talk to you too much about finance, but I have a big passion for it. But the key with finance is, every time the stock market goes down to a new low, it goes right back up and sets a new high. Ever since our children's children were around. We're trading at 17.3 now. We're almost at an all-time high. We were at 18,001. Anyhow, so I win this trip. Board the airplane. This is the first time I ever was able to be around, I call it the haves in life. Board this airplane, go to the World Golf Village, St. Augustine, Florida. Amazing place. And to make the trip all that much better, when we changed planes in Dallas, I sit 2 seats in front of the legend, Byron Nelson. If you don't know who Byron Nelson is, this gentleman has records in golf that will never be broken. Tiger Woods is great. Phil is great. Davis, Duval, I guess Duval not so much anymore. Davis, these guys are great, but they will never break Byron Nelson's record. So we get off the airplane, and I'm telling Byron Nelson about this great trip that I just won that like a bazillion financial advisors that were trying for. And we're talking all the way from the baggage claim to the rental car line. We get to the rental car line, and the attendant asks for my driver's license and credit card. I hand him this information, and he comes back a few minutes later and says, I'm sorry, Mr. McGilvrey, but we can't rent you a car. I don't understand why, because Edward Jones, this prestigious firm, had all the reservations ready for me. Here was the problem. You had to be 25 to rent a car, and I wasn't old enough to do that yet. But what I learned was, and this is a great lesson, sometimes in our problems, there's great opportunities. Byron Nelson took me to the World Golf Village. And all the advisors throughout this was people all throughout the United States, were joking that I wasn't old enough to win a car, but were in admiration that I was able to ride with the legend. Throughout this trip, everyone's playing golf. I'm able to ask these phenomenal advisors that I was able to become friends with how they become successful, how they were able to build these practices that they built. And I remember the last day, there was this very, very distinguished gentleman that was with Lord Abbott, a money management company that was sponsoring part of this trip. I could see him out of the corner of my eye frequently because this gentleman oozed with distinction. There was just something about him. But he came up to me at the end of this trip and he pulled me aside and he says, "Young man, do you have any idea what you've done?" I said, "Sir, a little bit cocky. I worked really hard to get to this trip." He says, "Do you realize there's advisors in this room that have been in the business for 20 years? And this is the first time they ever won anything like this, and they worked hard too." He says, "You're light years ahead of everyone else." This confidence that he spoke into me, we became great friends later on. He just said, his reasoning, I think, was to be genuinely nice and speak the confidence into me, but he wanted to make sure that Lord Abbott and himself would be a part of the things I was doing in the future, which he certainly was. This gentleman managed billions and billions of dollars on Wall Street. But after he told me that, I went for a walk on the golf course by myself, 22, 23 years old, and I started dreaming with my eyes wide open. And that is the best way to dream. I dreamt about having my own firm one day. I dreamt about going public, ringing the New York Stock Exchange bell, having my own commercials, having hundreds of advisors work for me. I dreamt big. And I worked really hard. Once the plane landed back in San Antonio, I deplaned and within 2 months won the next trip to the Swiss Alps. I was on fire. Once you give me a taste of something like this, of how these people live and the things they're able to do, I worked really hard and I continue to do well in the finance industry, so well that Edward Jones hired me to go every month to St. Louis and train the other advisors on my sales strategies, on my closing techniques, on my prospecting methods. So I couldn't tell you how much confidence this gave me, knowing that where I came from, what I had to go through to get there. With this success and with advisors, our numbers are public, and so pretty much every major firm came after me. Goldman Sachs, Merrill Lynch, Charles Schwab, UBS, all of these people were painting these pictures that I was with a boutique company. If I wanted to be a real financial advisor, I needed to get to institutional money management. I took the bait from Merrill Lynch. They hired me. I'll never forget if you called my office, you'd hear this is Jeremy McGilvrey with the Private Client Group High Net Worth Division of Merrill Lynch. All these fancy words that I had. I learned real quick I wasn't happy at Merrill Lynch. They were steadfast on doing what was best for them and not what was best for the client. Edward Jones's philosophy, they took care of their customers. They looked out for the customer first. Merrill Lynch, not so much. They looked out for their shareholders. And that's why, not very long ago, Bank of America bought Merrill Lynch at an emergency liquidation value. Because sooner or later, life is going to audit you. I don't care if you're Merrill Lynch or if you're an individual. You need to pass that audit. I wasn't happy at Merrill, but when I wrote my book, the Live and Learn 7 Life Lessons, I learned Merrill did something great for me. They taught me that I was able to work around the best of the best and beat these guys, because when I was at Jones, I did think these institutional money managers knew something I didn't know. I thought they pulled them aside in the hallway and whispered the secret to getting $100 million accounts, but that wasn't the case. So I looked around. I was going to go to work actually for Bank of America. They offered me $500,000 bonus and a substantial salary to go work in Austin. It was hard to turn that down, but after a conversation with my father, he said, as long as you work with someone else, your growth will always be limited. Being young and thinking that you know everything, there's a great quote that says, when you're young, you want to conquer the world. When you're older, you want to conquer yourself. Fortunately, I've learned from that. But I walked into my branch manager's office, corner office, and gave her a piece of paper with 2 words on it. Those 2 words said, I quit. Wasn't my smartest move, walked out, started my own firm. Worked really hard, achieved quite a bit of success. News 4, WAI, the NBC affiliate, named me the financial planning expert of San Antonio in 05, 06, 07. Reuters Advice Point named me the top 200 financial advisors in the U.S. for several years. At one point, I was managing $500 million, actually $480 million. I had dozens of financial advisors working for me. And about 2006, I was tired. I'd been burning the candle at both ends for a very long time, and I wanted to step back. This was about the same time that my Black American Express came in the mail in a little suitcase, and I said, I'm just going to travel the world and do whatever I want. I promoted my people from within in my firm, my vice president to president, brought an incredibly dynamic trader in from New York. This gentleman had so many acronyms after his card, I had to almost get him a bigger card because he wanted all the acronyms on there. But I turned my firm over to these guys, and this firm will always be my first child. As I move faster, when that firm died, part of me went with it. But anyhow, I backed away from the firm, and I'll never forget, I came back in from out of the country, and I met some of my clients at Home Depot. Went over, shook their hands, said, thank you guys very much for working with us, and they said they don't work with me anymore. I had never lost a client. That was important to me. And I found out, I went back to the office, brought my key people into the conference room, asked them what was going on. I found out that the Social Security numbers had gotten mixed up and some birth dates had gotten mixed up. And the problem with life is, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, if you don't take care of the small things, you'll never get the big things right. Attention to detail, and maybe that came from my military time, attention to detail is paramount. Things are going a little bit better. A law firm came to me in 2008, said you need to buy more companies. Everybody's going out of business. Now's the time to buy. Couldn't agree more. We put together some plans called a stock repurchase contracts with my president, my CFO, and my law firm. I approved everything, thought everything was kosher. When you go to a professional, whether it's a physician or whether it's an attorney, and being young, you follow their advice. I learned in one of the chapters of my book, my first book, it's called There's Nothing Common About Common Sense. And I talk to financial advisors a little bit directly here, and I say our job as financial advisors is to gather information, mix it with common sense, and ultimately decide what we should or shouldn't do for our clients. That's our job as individuals. Gather as much information, mix it with common sense, and figure out what we should or shouldn't do. Anyhow, some trades took place that were not kosher. I was in London, and I get a phone call saying that I'm on the front page of the paper saying I'm taking my client's money and spending it in Las Vegas casinos. Nothing could be further from the truth. And meeting with my marketing company and working with my staff, everyone told me not to comment to the press because the press was swarming. But I went against their judgment, and I felt that I needed to address what took place, being the chairman of the company, and standing up and telling these people, look, nothing could be further from the truth. Everything seemed to be okay until one of my clients cut her stepson out of a trust. Things went awry very quickly there. And there were some trades, these same stock repurchase contracts, that were brought into question through the Securities Exchange Commission and through federal regulators. I was out of town when this was brought to light. I was in New York, actually, take a direct flight back to San Antonio. Tell these what's going on, what do we need to do, meet with federal authorities and say, if there's a problem, let me know, I'll fix it. Federal authorities are fine with everything, no problems. I leave and back out of town again. I get a call from a friend of mine, and he tells me, I just got done meeting with some friends of mine that I used to work for at the district attorney's office, and your file's there, and it doesn't look good. He goes, you've got two options, Jeremy. Option A is lawyer up, come back here and fight an uphill battle, or option B, that I highly recommend, you get out of town. You get out of the country, and you let this thing chill out a little bit, because the DA, Susan Reed, was looking to get in the press, which she did substantially, and was going to do everything they could to indict, despite federal regulators found no wrongdoing. I told him the same thing as I'd said before. I'll take a direct flight back and address what took place. Because one of the most important characteristics that I want people to know when I go to my grave is I don't run from problems. I always address them. And if you do make a mistake in life, you've got to learn to utter the 3 hardest words out there. And those 3 hard words are, I was wrong. There's nothing wrong with being wrong. People aren't perfect. So anyhow, I was told everything was still taken care of, not a big deal, but I still retained counsel. It was the same counsel that had put together these stock repurchase contracts. I thought, who else better to hire than the people who drafted this? They're going to know what's going on. I get a call from the same friend that used to work for the DA's office, said the grand jury came back with indictments on me, on my firm, and on my attorneys. Embezzlement, securing documents by deception. He says the Texas Rangers will be there to arrest you on Monday. This was a Thursday. Nobody wants to know the thoughts that will go through your mind when the Rangers are coming to arrest you and you know that you're facing several life sentences because of the substantial amounts of money that are involved in this. The thing my friend was wrong about was the Rangers coming on a Monday. They didn't come on a Monday. They came on a Wednesday. They pounded on my door. I wasn't going to run from my problems. And they arrested me, took me to jail. The Rangers were actually exceptionally nice to me. I didn't want the press to get any more coverage because they had incredible sensationalization of the things that took place in my firm. And I was given a short-term bond, but then once my law firm went to post, they revoked everything. They said I was more of a flight risk than Emilio Earhart. They weren't letting me go anywhere. So anyhow, this same law firm files an injunction, says a conflict of interest, that they can't represent me any longer because now they have their own criminal problems to deal with because they were named in this. My assets are frozen. I have nothing. I'm given a court-appointed lawyer. I'm facing 11 life sentences. I'm taking polygraph exams, passing everything because I have nothing to hide. And I'm told a deal was worked out. I meet with the district attorney's office. I meet with the judge. And I'm told if I'll plead guilty to something, and I wouldn't plead guilty to what they wanted me to plead guilty to. I gave them the charge I would plead guilty to, which was misapplication of fiduciary property, which means investments were bought that had too much risk in them. And every investment has risk. Everything in life has risk. Jim Rome says life is risky. It's so risky that you won't get out of it alive. So there's a lot of risk in life. I pled to that. I was told I'd get a 6-month deferred adjudication if I would plead to that and if I would pass all my polygraphs, which I did. 2 days before I was to go to the judge, I get brought to the DA's office again. They want me to testify against the law firm that drafted all this. I refuse to do it. I don't think this law firm intentionally did anything wrong. I think that they just made some mistakes. I still have in writing the probationary term, and I walk into the courtroom, look up at the judge, and I'm given not one, but 2 20-year prison terms. I was blown away. The first one didn't even register. And then I thought it was a 20-year probationary term or something. But I learned real quick it wasn't. And when you get 40 years, you're housed with people who have 40 years, in cells with people who have 40 years, which are the people who commit murder and commit some pretty heinous acts. I go from one place to another because the wardens don't like me, because the press is trying to figure out what took place. How did someone go from up here to down here so quickly? And I sit there and I ask myself a lot of very hard questions, because although it was proven that I never broke a law, eventually I did a lot of dumb things. And that's why I am an expert on habits, because something I had to learn was I wanted to ask myself why I behaved the way I behaved. And all behavior goes to habits. It goes to our character. Anyhow, I'm working really hard to try to figure out what went wrong, and at this point I have no resources to bring the truth to fruition. But I go to work really, really hard on myself. I start devouring one book after another, one study after another, because I know, just like I knew when I was a little kid that I was going to hit that baseball over the left field fence, I knew I was going to beat this. And I figured out how to make this, in some senses, an enjoyable challenge. I believed in myself, I believed in my abilities, I believed in the truth. Another great quote, there's 3 things you can never hide. One's the sun, one's the moon, the other one's the truth. And thank goodness for that. Anyhow, very quickly the days turned to weeks, weeks turned to months, months turned to years, and I found myself in some very, very bad places around some very, very bad people. But I kept that inner will, and I worked really hard to develop a plan and develop a strategy, and to know that I didn't want to beat this, I didn't want to achieve the goal of getting out, I had to. And that's a big difference when it comes to life. If you want to lose 10 pounds, you might. If you have to, you will. And so I finally was able to get the correct documents, put together an extraordinary outline of over 50 exhibits laying out that a 3rd grader could understand that I had nothing to do with this stuff, and borrow from friends and family to retain counsel. I finally get my outline to this council in front of the board of pardons and paroles, and I'll never forget. You get mail every now and again in prison, and there's something your family can send to you. It's called a JPay. It's a little, almost like email. You can't respond through email. There's no computers for you to touch, but you have to write your letter. They approve your letter and they send it out. But this email communication that was sent to me slid under my cell door, said call home. That's not a good letter to get. You're afraid something's going to happen or something bad happened. But anyhow, they finally open the cell doors. There's phones in that area. I go down and I call. My brother answers. And I ask my brother, what's going on? Is everything okay? And he says, Dad needs to talk to you. I said, is he okay? He's like, I can't tell you that. I was like, look, I'm in a 3rd world country pretty much here. These are 2 parallel universes that we'll never touch. If something is wrong, please tell me. And then my sales skills go to overdrive. I want to know what the deal is. And my brother tells me I was just given an immediate release. My brother told me I can go home. They're going to take me home that day, if not the next. The Board of Pardons and Paroles saw what happened and got me out of there. Probably the most difficult part of that process was beating it with your mind and relying on your faith. But the very first thing I said to myself was, we beat this. Not I. I is what got me in there. We is what beat this. So they call me for chain in the middle of the night, take me out of there. Whatever you do not tell anyone that you're going home. Because if you're not going home, they don't want to go home. Another great quote, an inability to be guided by a healthy fear of bad consequences is a disastrous flaw. If you don't have a healthy fear of the consequences that are going to follow, you don't care. These guys, there is no consequences. They'll never see the light of day again. Tattooed from head to toe. They don't care about anything. But they put me on a bus. I'll never forget the last guy I was handcuffed to. This guy was such a threat to society that they had to shoot him so full, like they called it Thorazine, because of these bus rides. It was a 4-hour trip. I think it was in the Edinburgh area, going to Huntsville. And one of the things I learned quickly, when they handcuff you to someone else, you only let them handcuff your non-dominant arm, because you're going to need your dominant arm to survive some of those bus rides. But this guy's there with his lips sucked in, drooling down his everywhere. I don't think he blinked one time. He was that dangerous that they had to do that to this man, and they're handcuffing me to him, and I did no wrong. So anyhow, I get there, and one of the harder parts is when they're releasing you in Huntsville, there's about 8 cages that you go through. Boy, is this a mentally difficult exercise. But there's a guard at the front, calls everybody's names off. But there was always about a dozen people's names they left off that list. And so when you go through that cage, there's another one that calls those names off. And you are hoping with everything in you that they will continue to call your name. I was released that day despite a horrible fight broke out when we were changing into our clothes to go home. I don't know how these people just have no thought process to how life works. My family's out there waiting in Huntsville. I tell them, go, get out of here, let's go. Because they just let some very dangerous people back into society. These are dangerous people. If y'all aren't locking your doors, you're crazy. There are some very dangerous people out there. And again, an inability to be guided by a healthy fear of bad consequences is a disastrous flaw. These people have no fear of the consequences that happen in life. After an apology and $50 from the state and saying, we'll get back with you and let you know when everything's done, I go to work on my plan of getting my life back together. And I think the reason why in a short amount of time I've been able to achieve what I have is we all have standards for ourselves. And there's a certain level of standards that we believe we deserve to live. Tony Robbins says, change your standards, change your life. Boy, do I believe that. Went to work for my father, paid me $600 a month for a couple months when we worked together. Not a lot of money, but way more than I'd earned the last 5 years. He had a pinstriping and graphics company. So I'd go to these dealerships where he'd put the paint down the side, and I'd see these salesmen standing around doing nothing. I figured they made more money than $600 a month. I applied, was hired to sell cars. So I go from the chairman and CEO of a $500,000 company to an inmate to a car salesman, but I become a good car salesman. Very first month I'm there, salesman of the month. Next month I'm there, salesman of the month. Next month I'm there, salesman of the month. Same thing with the next. And it wasn't because I was a good salesman. It was because I hustled. I saw anyone around me, I was going to go talk to them and ask them how I could help. I worked there, resign, and go full-time on launching my website, publishing my first book. My first CD came out recently. Goal setting, goal setting and planning. January 1 of this year, 28 days ago, thesecrettosuccess.com went live. Through an amazing stroke of luck, I was able to purchase a great domain name. And now I'm doing what I used to do for financial advisors years ago in my mentorship programs for individuals. I'm talking to these people about what I've learned. And this a real quick story or analogy. 2 salesmen wake up in the morning. One salesman sees it snowing outside. He says, oh, with this type of weather, the cars are covered in snow, roads are covered in snow. You can't expect me to go make sales calls like this. Next salesman wakes up, lives in another little bit nicer neighborhood, looks out his window, sees the snow everywhere, says to himself, wow, with it snowing like this, I bet everybody will be home, including the salesman. I better go make sales calls. It's a mindset. My mindset was this. Last quote, hopefully. Andrew Carnegie said, as inconsistent as it may seem, you'll learn more about how to succeed from the failures than you will from the so-called successes, because they'll teach you what not to do. Knowing what not to do is very important in life. And my mindset was, I have a lot of value I can offer people with what I've learned. And that's why I was able to launch this domain name. That's why I was able to do what I'm doing. And that's why I'm going to give you the formula that I've used to achieve my goals. The formula that's worked for me to beat the tremendous adversity I had to go through, to write my first book, to build my company that I have now. But first, hold on. This goes with the formula. And before y'all open it, because I think the letters are the same for everybody, but the numbering inside is a little bit different, let me tell you when. Have you seen this? Thank you so much.
Now?
Yeah, pass everybody. I think I get them too. Okay, everybody have one? Follow the instructions on the outside of there. Everybody's is a little bit different, but open it up real quick. Couple more seconds. I know I've already went too long. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. How many did you get? 3. Who got 3? Show of hands. Higher, higher, higher. Who got 4? You got 4? Who got 5? Did anybody get 6? Okay, the people who got 6 are the winners. Every one of these sheets are the same. Look at your sheets again. There are 6 Fs. Very few people will get this right. This is how goal setting works. Seriously, follow me here. This is how goal setting works. Unless you know what you're looking for, you'll never find it. And when it comes to having goals, I was at an event here in San Antonio last week. I'm a student of the business, I'm a life learner, and I remember this gentleman asked everybody in the room who had goals. Hands shoot up everywhere. He started pointing, what's your goal? What's your goal? These people didn't have goals. They couldn't tell them what their goals were. If you have a goal, and if you're serious about a goal, if you're serious about improving your life, if you're serious about accomplishing great things, you need to know exactly what you want. Because it could be right in front of your face, something that's there to help you achieve that goal, and you'll never see it because you don't know what it is. And this is a great example that I think helps illustrate this. So when it comes to the formula, number 1, figure out exactly what you want. When you know what you want, all types of things open up. The cliche they've used with cars. When you buy a car, you see other people who have the same car. I heard a gentleman say the other day at an event, he was shopping for baby strollers. Now he sees strollers everywhere. When you figure out exactly what it is you want, you start seeing it in your subconscious mind and not with just your eyeballs. You might be getting a cup of coffee at Starbucks, and you go to put your half and half in the coffee, and you see a little flyer up there that someone's advertising something, a service, a plan, a possibility. They can bring your dreams to pass. They can bring your goals. Number 1, again, figure out exactly what you want. And the experts as Jim Rohn, as Zig Ziglar, as Tony Robbins, they say the more detailed you think about this, the more it will pull you towards it. It's a magnetizing effect. Here's number 2. Number 2 is write it down. I can't tell you how important that is. Most people miss this step because this goes with what Mr. Rome teaches us. What's simple to do is simple not to do. Write it down. Figure out exactly what you want. I want to write a book. Brainstorm some good titles for your book that might be. Write it down. The last step. 3-step process, super simple. Now you make a plan of how you're going to get there. The Super Bowl Sunday. Pete Carroll, Bill Belichick right now are making plans for this game. They're not just going to show up and say, oh, I hope we win the football game. They're making plans. They're making great plans. And when it comes to planning, their obviously goal is to win the game. But if another football analogy, the national championship recently happened with Ohio State. They had 4 fumbles, 4 turnovers, but that didn't stop them from the goal of winning the game. And so if you fumble, if you don't execute on your plan, don't quit your goal. Stay on track. The reason why I like to share my story is because life is going to hit every one of us with adversity. I said in the beginning, my goal today is to inspire you to always pursue your dreams no matter what obstacles life throws at you. Because when you're trying to do something with your life, it doesn't matter who you are. When you're trying to do something in your life, you're going to have people and things that are going to try to stop you. When I was launching this website, thesecrettosuccess.com, Murphy's Law took place time and time again. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. The formula this works for, it's the same as if you take 5 times 5. We all know the answer for that. If you take 3,012 times 211, it's the exact same formula. It just takes you a little bit longer to work it out. The great news about when you learn how to set one goal right, you learn how to set them all. And when you do the work to put this plan down in paper, the bad news is it's going to take you a good 10 to 15 hours to do this the right way. Here's the good news. If you do this the right way and you get this down in writing, you will save yourself easily 10 to 15 hours every week for the rest of your life. Why? Because you'll know what to do. You'll know what to execute. You'll never stand around and say, well, what's next? They say repetition is the mother of all skill. Figure out what you want. People don't know what they want in life. And if you want a secret, have to have that. Don't just want it, have to have it. I got my life back together with nothing because I had to. I got out because I had to. I wrote a book because I had to. I hope I added value to y'all's lives today because I had to. So figure out what you want. Really figure out what you want. Sky's the limit. They say most locked doors are in our mind. Where I sat, those locked doors were in my mind. Write it down. A lot of people will nod their head when I teach classes about goal setting. They'll be shaking their head yes, but they're not going to do it. Write it down. Something magical happens. Your subconscious gets permission to go to work on this stuff. Write it down. And then make a plan. A lot of people need to write books. I don't care if you publish them or not. They need to write books to get their thoughts down in writing so they can learn some stuff from themselves. The most important person you ever need to study is yourself, not someone else. Get your thoughts down. Say you want to write a book. Well, your plan might look like a 300-page book. What if you write a page a day? You'll have that accomplished in a year. Thank you, guys.